So Bob Mueller says hi.
Hi. That's probably not what he said, but okay.
So let's talk about that a little bit. You and I were talking backstage, and I'm still convinced after watching that hearing that he was having trouble hearing, and that to some degree that led to some of the. It was a rather odd hearing, and the Democrats clearly did not get out of it what they wanted.
Well, they clearly did not do that. I think it was odd in the sense that I think it showed, one, as I've said before, there was nothing really new. We had the report. Everybody who had the report knew what the report said. There was no real, nothing coming there. And we didn't think he would say anything unusual. But also, Mr. Mueller had been on that Hill 80-something times. So sometimes I think the hearing was planned. Sometimes I think the hearing was, to, as we call, filibuster, the questions. But at the end of the day, no, it went terribly for the Democrats. They can't take that. They've had a problem since 2016, November 2016. And they have promised everyone in their base that they wanted to impeach and that Bob Mueller was going to do it for them. And guess what? It didn't happen. And I think that was just solidified even more through the hearing last week.
And yet it seems that the Democrats now have a problem because the progressive members of the House, I read that now more than half of the Democrats in the Democratic caucus want to impeach the president, and Bob Mueller didn't give them what they wanted. It almost strikes me as the Democrats are where Republicans were in 2011 with Barack Obama. They're desperate for that one thing to beat the guy. Mm-hmm. And they thought Bob Mueller was going to do it, and then it wasn't him. It was going to be the Southern District of New York, and now it's not that. And they're throwing stuff at the wall hoping that it's going to be something.
Well, it would be very nice if the Democrats actually had a plan. Instead of worrying about trying to take down this president whose the economy is doing well, our negotiations are going well, our standing in the world is going up, instead of doing that, actually put forth a plan that actually would continue the economic growth we're seeing, continue the low unemployment. They just don't do that. So you're right. They're like that person who doesn't want to, in many ways, I think they don't want to try to achieve. They would just rather win by chance, or somebody come along and say, we're going to pick you. And frankly, it's becoming very difficult because at a certain point in time, and I don't know if some of you ever saw last week, right after the Mueller hearing, we did another immigration hearing. It was the 6th hearing, basically in which my chairman brought the Border Patrol and others to just bash them because they wanted to make political points. And I'd had all I could take. Because at a certain point in time, we can talk about problems, and that's fine, and that's oversight in Congress. But until we put forward solutions, then we're frankly using the people that they're claiming to help, and that's got to stop.
Yes. In that regard, I mentioned this to Senator Cotton this morning, that I remember during the government shutdown at the beginning of the year that the Democrats insisted there was no crisis at the border, and now suddenly there absolutely is a crisis, and Donald Trump's to blame, and it's been a crisis that's been going on. And you saw this remarkable spectacle of the Democrats in the debate on Wednesday night. You would think Barack Obama was a conservative Republican that they hated.
Yeah, amazing how time changed. Yeah. What's really interesting there is they are struggling with it. There was no crisis at the border. Jim Clyburn actually laughed about it at the first of the year. He was asked, what about the crisis at the border? Oh, there's no, and he laughed about it. Here's the problem, though. This is what the Democrats are having a struggle with. They know it's a crisis at the border. They know there's a problem. The problem is they can't sell their solution. Their solution is just let everybody come in. They can't go out, because every time you mention open borders, it's like they go into a fit because, no, we're not for open borders. Let me explain this. You want them to come in, us not stop them, send them in, and let them come back to court later, and if they did or not, and that's okay. Yes. Is that not open borders? No. Explain this to me. I mean, I may be from North Georgia, but I ain't that slow, okay? They got to fix it somehow.
Well, I mean, the president has proposed a number of solutions. It just seems like they want to keep this issue festering for campaigns.
They do. And this is where it got really real for me is a week ago when I just simply stopped and it just sort of went off. And I said this, it's dehumanizing to continue to talk about this problem without trying to fix this problem. There's 3 fixes that could be done right now. The president and I've talked about it. We've laid this out. I've had a bill on the desk since February that does the Flores decision, which talks about the detention, that 20-day issue. Right now, do not let anyone ever tell you that we're separating children right now, because we're not, from families. If we separate a child, a young adult right now, it is for several reasons. It is for either the person that they're with is incompetent, the person has a criminal record, the person has a communicable disease, or the person is not their legal guardian. Let me tell you something, to sober you up right after lunch here, for just say from a somber position, over 3,000, close to 4,000 cases are now documented of people that are either buying, renting, or borrowing children to come across the border. This is actually happening. They're doing it because the Flores decision won't let us keep it. So what's happening now is if you were to bring your child across and you're matched, everything else, you're in custody for just a short amount of time till you get with a governmental agency, and then they send you out to wherever you have a place to go, and then will show up at some point for a court date. So that's something we need to put aside right now. That's just not happening, but we need to fix that so that we can do it on the border. The other issue is asylum. We need, right now, if you come across and claim asylum, credible fear, 90% get to stay because of their initial credible fear. But if they show back up to court in a year or two, 90% are rejected on the asylum claim. So we're letting them basically come here and then take root, and then we have a problem. The last one is a trafficking victims protection, which is basically says if a child comes across from Canada or Mexico, we can send them immediately back. But Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, those places, we cannot. In fact, those governments have actually begged us to change this law so that we can send those young people back to where they came from. Look, if you don't want to fix this, and I said this to my Democratic colleagues, if you're not wanting to fix this border and close these perverse incentives to come, then undoubtedly you're okay with over 30% of the females who are coming up through Mexico being raped or sexually abused. Then undoubtedly you're okay with families who are separating themselves from their home and roots and being starved and beaten and extorted for money coming up there. Because if you don't want to fix this, then you're using them, and that's just morally wrong.
That's a really good point. Another hot button issue for you, one I keep bringing up, and Tim Scott and I had a good conversation about this morning, on the debt and the deficit. That we have a difficult situation now in that the Democrats do control the House. Mm-hmm. We got to be able to find something that passes the House. And yet, even when Republicans were in control of both the House and the Senate for 2 years, it just doesn't seem like we really are the party of fiscal responsibility.
It is a problem. And there's one thing, though, you left out. And it's been true even when we were in control of the House. We would pass, in fact, we did pass budgets and stuff and spending bills that were within line with what our priorities were. But when they got to the Senate, of course, they were not active because of the filibuster rule. Because they can keep up to 60 votes, which keeps we've changed it for judges, and we see the great results for that. But on appropriations bills, the very bedrock, and Senator Bew and I have had a lot of conversations about this, they will not change it. Mitch McConnell won't change it. So the minority, Chuck Schumer and the Democrats, can hold that up. So it's a balance between the two. So now we've got the problem of the Democrats being in charge of the House, and then going to the Senate, they still have the filibuster issue that we've got to deal with. But I'll also take it a step further. As much as I didn't like a great deal of the policy from this past week, the president and I talked about it, and we talked about what we're trying to do is save the military issues. And also, by the way, the House has got to pass appropriations bills again and cut $17 billion out of what they've already passed. So we're going to go backwards and actually cut money out of what the House had already passed. But here's the issue we're not talking about. And this is the one, until we have these fights over discretionary spending, which are fine, and I'm sure Senator Scott and others would say, that's 17% of our total spending. We're not discussing the 84% of our budget, which has to do with Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, healthcare costs, those long-term things. Until we're really serious, it's almost about like, until we're really serious about those things, the discretionary spending, we've got to be serious about that. But are you going to save 2 pennies over here, worrying about $10 going out the door over here? Mm-hmm. So I agree, we've got to have a balance. It gives me a hope that some of my members in the House now, as we come back, hopefully in the majority in next year, is now we come back and say, okay, we know what it's like under this. Let's get together, move the best that we can forward, and also hopefully get the Senate to go along.
So listen to you, is it true the Democrats are the opposition and the Senate's the enemy?
Pretty close. No, I think it's just the matter. This is the problem we've had, though, and it's become, in the last 20, 30 years, this has become the issue, and especially in the last 10 to 15, when you have such polarized positions. And when polarized positions get translated into voting blocks, or they get translated into a procedural block as we have in the Senate, that is an issue that needs to be dealt with. I know what they say, and many of the old timers in the Senate say, well, you don't want to do this because if we were back in a minority, we would want those rights protected. Well, I'm sorry. I'll just be honest. From our two parties, this is where I have a disagreement with my philosophies. Democrats will do whatever it takes to put forward bad ideas and get it done. If you don't believe it, look at Obamacare. They'll do whatever it takes. They'll change rules, they'll bend people, they'll bend arms. And my only question is I'm not going to do anything immoral or wrong, but my question is why not do what we are there to do when we can do it? I don't want to put it off to the next generation. Let's do it now. So we'll have to see.
having been in the majority, now in the minority in the House, and I know we've got more news of more Republican retirements today. Can you just describe for the crowd what it's like being the majority versus the minority? Because I think people may have some general understanding, but when you're in a democracy versus a totalitarian state run by Nancy Pelosi.
Yeah, that's pretty well. When some of her other members let her be speaker, yeah, that's another issue going on. It's a really difference in the majority. When we're in the majority, the agenda is on you. You have to provide the 218. In essence, if you want to move something, you get 218 votes. Politics is simply math. Who can get the votes to pass the legislation. So majority, we would set the agenda. We were going to pass the bills that we were. What I found though, and was really concerning to me is in the last Congress and previous Congress, I was able to work across the aisle with members who we disagreed on a lot of different things, but to pass bills that made a difference in people's lives. The First Step Act, which is criminal justice reform, is my bill, along with Hakeem Jeffries, which has made a large difference. And the president has taken this on. We've seen those stories, of people being released, reunited with their families, having skills to now go out and have jobs. And that was the thing that we wanted to do, that I was able to work bipartisanly with. And we get it through the House and the Senate, sometimes over opposition from the Democrats, because they realized Republicans were taking a lead in something that they thought was only their issue. If it's right, and we need to do it. But what I found this year in the minority, number one, I have to sit next to Jerry Nadler and call him chairman. I would prefer to change that as we go. But at this point, you have to react to whatever the majority wants to do. So from a minority perspective, and it took some of our folks a little bit of time to realize that the first couple of months. We'd go into our conference meetings and they'd come in and say, well, we're going to do this and pass this legislation. And I'd look at them and say, bless your heart, no, you're not. That's precious, but they're going to set the agenda. You're going to have to do something else. And you're going to have to put forward, from a minority perspective, make sure that voice is heard. What I have had to fight with, Eric, and for many that have had to watch, for 7 months, I have had to watch a majority trample minority rights. I have had to watch a majority put forward bills that cannot pass, and even if they did pass, would be harmful or couldn't even work. Some people, the last little bit, Mitch McConnell was, I think, criticized this past week for not passing the, quote, election security bill. What a crock. The election security bill that passed out of the House that we had to fight through judiciary, it had a passage in there that said that you cannot keep someone from voting. You cannot keep a person from voting. Now, as lawyers understand this, there's a problem with terminology there. It should have said you cannot keep anyone from exercising their voting right. So what happens is if a 10-year-old goes to the polls and I keep them from voting, I've committed a felony. This is in their bill. I pointed this out. You know what the answer is? I'm not joking. So this is the bill that they, quote, would handle foreign interference and everything else. It can't even handle domestic interference. So these are the kind of things that we deal with. Being in the minority means you stand up for your rights, and that means that you also remind the Speaker of the House that she has to by the rules too.
Yes, we've seen that recently. Yeah, that was an interesting scene there in the House when Nancy Pelosi did what she did and forced it to a vote. And I'm fascinated occasionally by the commanding use of rules in the minority, and the Democrats did it to the Republicans as well, even in the House of Representatives, which is so autocratic under the rules. There are still ways for the minority.
And it should be. And I think that's the thing that we point out. And what we pointed out that day is that what really was bothersome about that day, and this will actually be written into the press, what Nancy Pelosi did the Speaker did that day was violate the rules, said she didn't, which she did, because the House said she did. And then she made her conference come down and say, she broke the rules, but we're not going to punish her. What does that tell the American people? Well, it tells a lot about the Democratic Party. It tells a lot about the current membership of the party under Pelosi in the House. It is, we're going to do whatever we want to do, and we're not going to take the consequences for it. Sounds a lot like some of their legislation. And this is the problem that we've got to face, because if we ever break down civility and decorum, and I don't care if it's in the public space, the faith space, or just our civil discourse that we have in town, if we ever lose that, then we lose who we are. And that's got to maintain. And you've got to understand, if you break the rules, you pay the punishment for it. Even if it meant, and this is terrible, you couldn't talk the rest of the day.
Amen. shift gears just a little bit. The relationship now, obviously, with the president and the Republicans in Congress. I know that there are members in the Republican conference in the House and the Senate who have qualms with the president, but also he puts points on the board. What's the relationship like between you and the president, between the House Republicans and the president?
Between the president and I, it's actually really good. I mean, we talk, and the thing about it, I always say about this president is this president's the same on the stage as he is off the stage. If he's in the Oval Office, and I've met with him privately, I've met with him and seen him in public, he's the same. He has big ideas that come all the time. His ways at times can offend people and grate on people because they're not used to somebody who just comes out and a lot of times speaks truth. If you hit at him, he will hit you back. I think some people are understanding that now.
Right.
And what's really interesting is once I get outside the Beltway, and you've been there many times, once you get outside the Beltway, you get this reaction. You get inside the Beltway, it's like, ah! You know. I mean, the reporters are shaking. Did you see what he tweeted today? No, I have a life. I didn't watch what he tweeted today. You know, so this is the kind of thing, I think what I see is I always say this about the president. This is a young man who sat in his bed, looked across the river and saw the New York skyline and said, one day I'm going to change that skyline. Yeah. And he did. This is also a man who comes forward and says, and he's always misquoted. I love how the press misquote this. They said he wants to put America first, and they stop right there. And they're talking about trade negotiations. He said, I'm going to put America first, and they stop as if it's a bad thing. But if you ever hear him talk about it, he says, I'm going to put America first. He said, because I expect other countries to put their country first. That's the way it's supposed to be. We come at it from a standpoint, that's the way it should be. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I think as we go forward, there is a getting used to a style. I think it's a certain condition in our country right now with the challenges we face on the world stage, with the challenges we face in our economic situation, where we need to continue to grow for future generations, then we need maybe some different answers than we've had before. And so we're going to continue to press on that and encourage people to focus on what we can do instead of what we can't do.
Let's move a little closer to home. Being in Georgia, you're a congressman from Georgia. Oftentimes these national issues get drowned out. They drown out the local issues. We've had the disaster package helping people in South Georgia, infrastructure issues in Georgia. But there's also this ongoing conversation in Washington, D.C. about technology. And I know one of the big issues in your part of the state that Brian Kemp talks a lot about is rural parts of the state falling behind more and more. Yes. To urban areas. You're for those of you who don't know, you're in the Northeast Georgia area.
Lakeland area, mountains.
Beautiful area in the state, but also an area in the state where if you wanted to find a high-tech job, it would be hard to find because of the lack of broadband. Yes. And of course, the Democrats' idea is that we should take over all the telephone companies and make a public utility out of them.
Show me something they don't want to take over.
Exactly. Yeah. How do you as a congressman, particularly one in Georgia, when you see Atlanta versus the rest of the state, how do you view your role in what you can do to help your part of the state?
Well, I appreciate that because a lot of times we do get in these big questions. But this one for me is there's some meat and potatoes issues, if you would, that we always dealt with. And I've dealt with my entire time there. Broadband is one of those. And I'm going to be gracious here for just a second, just say a terrible carrier up there who does not.
I know who your carrier is.
I've said worse, okay? But really, they're using people and using the federal funds to do competition instead of expand the broadband network.
But think how many carrier pigeons they've been able to employ to carry your bits and bytes to the internet.
Well, I think if you ask some of my folks, they're dead. The pigeons died somewhere over the mountains. But here's the deal. When we talk about internet and we talk about broadband in our rural communities, it's often talked about this digital divide. Ladies and gentlemen, it's not a digital divide, it's a dream divide. It's a dream divide when you have people who want to live in a certain area where I believe that their families or God brought them to, and they want to be able to access classes online. They want to access betterment of themselves. They want to be able to connect with other people. And you have broadband capabilities in which we have been stuck in a decades-old system that doesn't allow competition, that doesn't allow a mobility to use that. Then we're telling these folks who live in different parts that we don't care about you. It's been a frontline problem for me. You can ask my office in Gainesville, because I mentioned this a lot. I said, if you have a problem with this carrier, Windstream, call our office. And for the next 3 days, our office becomes a call center. this is a problem that needs to be, we've got to have some competition up there. We've got to think about new technologies. We've got to think about point to point. I want the conservative movement and the Republican Party to start taking our rightful ownership that we're the party of hope, that we're the party of dreams, we're the party of the individual, because we believe God can gifted everybody with different abilities and different processes. And if we're able to provide them with the access to those tools, to do the things that government should do, not control it, but allow it to blossom and to get the bad actors out of the way, then that's when we take this back. That's when we raise the gaze of our party. That's when we raise the gaze of the conservative movement to say we're the party that actually believes in people. And this is a broadband design that we've got to fix.
Well, so we were supposed to have at the conference the FCC chairman,
Yes.
Ajit Pai. His wife intended to surprise him with a trip out of town this weekend. So he had the conference and his wife had the trip and she won.
Good for him.
So, yes, absolutely.
Wow, that saved counseling
yeah,
bills.
he actually called me at home and said that I was putting him in trouble with his wife, so I needed to back down. So I did.
He's been very supportive.
Yes, he has been. And that's what I wanted to get to is it's amazing to me the number of people who have been killed by tax reform, healthcare reform, and net neutrality. I mean, all the people here are corpses.
Yeah, it's terrible.
Everybody in the country's died because of it. And yet what we've seen with the deregulation and the walking back of some of this stuff is that competition actually does work.
There's been nothing. When we went back for the net neutrality and he went back to where it should, it was amazing to me, and I asked this question to some of my Democratic colleagues. They didn't want to answer the question. It was amazing to me that the internet grew by itself until 2015, until Barack Obama figured out it couldn't do it by itself. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden it said, well, we need to control this because it's not, expanding. No, the problem was, again, it's a very simple, some of my colleagues are now calling it socialist versus capitalist. It's even more simple than that. Do you believe that people have the ability on their own with government in its proper boundaries to do what it's supposed to do and to have the abilities and freedoms to choose that, or do you think government ought to do it for them? Mr. Pai has come, he came actually to our district and talked to our communities and our municipalities. Think about this, the FCC chairman came to a district, and he's done this all over the country, to hear what actually goes on in rural communities and not just simply from a position in DC of only hearing from, lobbyists and corporations. And I think what we've found is when we see this happening, he understands that this is an enlarging. I have always believed that when an educated person is going to make better decisions, and they're going to also believe in themselves more because they'll have confidence. If we can provide the tools for that, that's what I'm going to keep fighting for. I have several bills that give classification of speed where they have to actually tell you what they're giving speeds at. A strange concept, but selling something you actually put in. And, but also using the Connect America funds to actually expand into rural areas, not go to compete with your neighbor next door.
I want to dramatically shift gears away from politics now and policy. I want to talk about faith. What role does it play in shaping both your worldview and how you implement policy?
It's everything. I talk about this all the time, and this concept that you have a faith and you have life and you have, here's my faith, here's my life, here's everything else. It's crazy. I wear these glasses, and I sort of describe a faith view like this. I can see certain things right now. The front row, y'all are looking really good now because you're all fuzzy at this point. But what I do is my faith is actually the thing. When I put my glasses on, it is how I see the world. And if for somebody who has made a commitment to Jesus Christ and said, that is my Savior, that's who I follow, then how else is anything else laid out that you don't see it through those eyes? We can differ in how we view that, but to say that faith is over here and my politics and my business are over here, I don't understand how that can be. And I think so for me, I go each day saying, you've given me this opportunity, you've made me this vessel, what can I do? And when you let that happen, then you can sleep at night and you know that faith is what drives you, and it doesn't have to be something you wear on your sleeve, it's who you are.
That's a good answer. So we've been allowing the crowd to submit some questions through Facebook, and I'm actually, I got a text here from one of the questions that was submitted. They didn't get it to me ahead of time. Barbara from Gainesville wanted to know,
hey, Barbara.
When she goes to Washington, D.C., she loves going up there as a tourist. She can't imagine having to work up there. What is your routine as a congressman when you're coming back and forth to the district? Okay,
well, I come back every week. I've said this before. Washington is where I work. My life is in Gainesville on Hawthorne Lane. My bride of 31 years is the absolute centerpiece of what God has given me on this life. If she was to walk in here today, she's teaching, she had to go out, she would take my breath away. So I come home. I have 3 kids, they're going on. That's my grounding. So I come back home every week, and sometimes I have to travel, and like tonight, I'm actually going to be in, I'm still in the Air Force, so I have active duty next week, and so I'm leaving tonight for that. But then when I'm in D.C., thank you. So when I'm in D.C., it starts at 5 in the morning. I go run, lift weights, work out. I'm in the back in my office. I sleep actually in my office, but
I wanted to ask you where if you had an
not on
apartment or
my
something in your
sofa. I
office.
actually have a separate room. You'd never know the difference. Come on, for all these folks. To hear that right now, for some of those who are wanting to change our rules, I say, look, you never know where I sleep. I got to bed. But I'm up, I run, I do my exercising just to maintain sanity. And then I'm in the office from basically 7 o'clock on till 8:39 at night. So for me, it's a job. I think that's the proper perspective we need to have in it. And because if not, I think you get skewed in what you believe.
I bet you do. Congressman, thank you very much for coming. Really appreciated having you on stage to talk.